Okay, so before I start, we're heading into that time of year when you're probably going to hear less of Amira snoring and more of the aircon or the evaporative cooler going in the background because Bendigo gets pretty damn hot and we're heading into the warmer part of the year. Now, previously I did a video where I was discussing the cabins in the woods in reference to the little forts that were built up in the woods on Janie's property. The thing with all the tree branches and then the thing with the bits of wood all stacked up. And in that video I was looking at the language that was being used because Janie mostly referred to it as forts. In one instance it was a camp, and I think one instance she referred to cabins in the wood. Daniel seems to more consistently refer to cabins in the wood. I'll provide the link for that video below in the description if you want to go and have a look at that. But in this video, I want to question this whole narrative in relation to the cabins in the wood. Are they significant? Or are they just one of those things that was introduced for a completely different reason? So in order to try and figure this out, we need to go right back to the beginning.
When we noticed that the children were gone, immediately jumped in the vehicle, surveyed all the areas, many dirt roads, many culverts as I could, and waited for the police to get there.
Now, that interview was filmed sometime before the 5th of May because it was basically attached to a CBC news article that was on the 5th of May. There's two other identical versions, or nearly identical versions, that he did with other news media channels. I won't play them because you've heard them, and if you heard that one, you've heard them. And that was the narrative as we originally came to know it. There was no mention there of running up to any cabins in the woods. According to Daniel, in that interview and in the other two interviews, he immediately jumped in his car and went and surveyed all the dirt roads and the culverts. In this version, it's as many dirt roads and as many culverts as he could. In later versions, it's all the dirt roads and all the culverts that he could. But, like I said, no mention of running up to any cabin in the woods. Now, in terms of statements in the documents, first of all, we have this statement from Malaya that was made, or this is listed as coming from statements made between the 2nd and the 4th of May. And if we go down to about the 4th line from the bottom, so we've got the usual stuff. She heard silence, told Daniel she didn't hear the kids. They got up together, checked the living room and outside and started yelling for them. And then I'll skip down. Daniel walked around yelling for them to see if he could get a reply, and eventually took her Nissan Pathfinder to go look for them in the woods. Janie was also out looking for them. She had the baby, so she could not go look. And then from a statement on the 9th of May, additional clarification, she claims that when Daniel was looking for the kids, he opened the front door. He put a wrench on top of the door the night before and it didn't fall down. So Daniel said they must have gone out the back sliding door. She also mentions that they wouldn't normally wander off on their own. They would if Daniel's children were there, but not by themselves. And then she talks about having a conversation with Janie in the yard and told her the kids were missing, and Janie got ready and went to look for them. So there's no mention here of Daniel running up through the woods. There's not even any mention here of Janie running or going up through the woods. Daniel's statement from between the 2nd and 4th of May, he ran around the house looking for them, but they were not there. Malaya got up when he got up as well and was looking for the kids. Daniel ran outside, but they were not in the yard and he couldn't see them. He got in the car and drove around, then ran around the woods, in the woods looking for them. Still no mention of actually running up into the woods. We have one mention here of him running around in the woods after he got in the car and drove around, but certainly nothing in terms of discovering they were missing and running up into the woods quickly before Malaya rang 911. Now, this is from the 9th. Daniel said he went out to look for the kids in the house and realised they weren't there. He went back into his bedroom to get dressed before going outside to look for them. Then he confirmed that the kids couldn't go out the front door because he'd jammed a wrench or a bolt in there to make sure the door didn't open. And then we have the story of him ripping open the door and a metal piece falling out. And then he says he took the car and went around to look. Then he came back. The RCMP were there and told him not to go back in the woods. Janie's interview from, I believe this was also between the 2nd and the 4th of May. So we have her talking about her dog barking. That woke her up. She heard Lily and Jack playing on the swings and laughing. Then she woke up again because she heard Daniel yelling. And she didn't think anything of it. We heard all that. Anyway, moving down the page. When she came outside after waking up again, she saw Malaya standing at the rock pile, holding Meadow. By the way, that rock pile was not there at the time that the children went missing. This has been confirmed by Chelsea. Malaya said Jack and Lily were missing for about 20 minutes and she had called 911. Janie got her coats and boots and walked around looking for them. Daniel was searching for them. That's the information that Janie gives us. So when you look at all the different May interviews, there's no mention of Daniel running up into the woods, to the cabins, to look for the children. So the first question is, where did that originally come from?
Today, some of the family members walked me through into that wooded area directly adjacent to where they live, maybe 20-second walk from the home into the woods. And as you walk into the woods, there's a little, kind of a tree fort, a little lean-to, and that's where the kids would play. And the family around there say they find it very hard to believe that given how thick the brush is on some of the steep banks around that area, and just the difficulty moving around if you sort of leave that trail, how difficult they find it to believe that they could have gone anywhere deeper than that into the woods.
So that comes from CBC News from the 7th of May. So it's not anyone making suggestions other than saying that here's where the children would play. He doesn't say who it was that took them up into the woods. But my money's on Daniel because, of course, he loves being in front of the camera. And also, back in May, I think Janie was still hiding out. So that is the first time that we see an introduction of the children possibly going up to this place in the woods. And you'll note that he refers to it as a fort or a lean-to. The first thing he referred to as a fort. The other thing he referred to as a lean-to, which to me sound like fair descriptions. So why suddenly introduce the possibility of the children wandering up into this area on the 7th of May? Well, that seems pretty clear, doesn't it? They were interviewed already 2 times by detectives by the time CBC went in there on the 7th of May. They were starting to do the shuffle. They were starting to realise that they were being looked at, and this is when we start getting them trying to change the narrative because they're realising, they're probably being told, we know the children didn't wander off. And of course this also happens to be the day before RCMP scaled back the search. Meaning that at the time that this interview was being done, RCMP had clearly already made the decision to scale back the search based on something, and they were working on preparing for their press conference. That says to me that on the 7th of May, people in Daniel's family were starting to feel the pressure. RCMP were probably putting the screws in a little bit and saying, we don't believe the children wandered off into the woods. So we have on the 7th of May, someone showing CBC this little area up in the woods. On the 8th of May, the search is scaled back. Don't think it's coincidental. The introduction of this area up in the woods occurred just before RCMP decided that continuing to search, even though it was only 6 days after the children went missing, but something prompted the RCMP to decide, yes, there's no need to continue a full-on search, we're going to scale it back. And I said this at the very beginning, you don't scale a search back only 6 days in, unless you have a really good reason to do so. As in, the investigation is headed in a different direction. So I think that this introduction of the little fort in the woods and taking the media up there and making a performance of it is probably the first change, or the first significant change in the narrative. When new information has been added in because questions are being asked and they don't have the answers. Interestingly enough though, after that one news article on the 7th of May, it isn't something that is then pushed heavily by Daniel or anyone else. Initially.
I closed the door, got my boots on, came out here, ran up in the woods. Just right up here. The kids have a little fort that they made out of sticks and fir branches, and that's where they go. You can see them and hear them. We went for walks in the woods. I had to practically carry Jack through the woods because there was no way that he was walking through all that tree falls and bushes. I did this whole area. There's an old road up back. When I got up to the top of the hill, I met Daniel. And I said to him, I said, did you find them? He said, no. He said, you coming with me? I said, no. I said, I'm going to search this area. Because when she told me the kids were missing, you automatically think they went into the woods. That was my first instinct.
So this was after Dingbat came on the scene sharing his little narrative. And Janie had been commenting on posts on Facebook, and according to her, people were getting her timeline all wrong. So she agreed to do this interview. And interestingly enough, what does she do? She's giving a guided tour of the property, and she takes the interviewer up to what she refers to as a fort. What's interesting and what has baffled me from day one is her claiming that when the kids go up to that fort, that you can see them and hear them. Now, yes, you probably could hear them, but see them? I don't think you could. The cameraman did a scan of the area and you can't see down to the house. So how could you see from the house or from the RV the children up in that little fort? I think that was the beginning of Janie's narrative of she always watches them. She probably realised when she got up there that she's talking about a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old to media and saying they come up here, and she probably thought, oh, I better say we can see them when they're up here and we can hear them. And here she introduces her going up to the road up the back and seeing Daniel up the back. So even though we now have the forts introduced, there's still no talk of Daniel actually running up to the forts and back. We still have this idea that Daniel is out in the vehicle searching. But again, we get the beginning of Janie's confusion. On one hand, she's saying Jack has to be carried through the woods, And then she's saying that her first thought when they were missing was that they must be in the woods. I wonder if that's where Daniel gets his new narrative from. He's listened to Janie's story and adopted it. Because it seems what he does is his brain must be so mushed that he hears a story and he just adopts it as his own. Because Janie's story here is exactly the same as the story that Daniel has most recently come up with. She's saying she immediately thought they must have gone into the woods and she went up and checked. But you know what's odd here is that she claims that you can see them and hear them. So if you can see them and hear them, you would have been able to tell that they weren't there because you didn't see them and you didn't hear them. And she also says Jack wouldn't go up through the woods. So she's already getting her narrative in a complete knot here.
My oldest granddaughter would come in here and they'd say, Granny, we want some snacks to go up to the little cabin they built or the little fort they built. They built it themselves out of sticks and brush. And I'd say, there's the fridge. My other two grandchildren, they could have whatever they wanted. My fridge was like one of those doors when you go into a store. It would open and close all the time. My oldest granddaughter would come in here and she would take snacks for all of them and pack them in her backpack and go up to the camp.
Honestly, my thoughts from listening to Janie is that she's a bit of a loose cannon. I think what originally happened in terms of the narrative is Malaya and Daniel came up with the script together. And I guess Daniel probably knew what Janie was like and gave her a very, very basic script, the one that she gave to the RCMP, which is where she came out, she saw Malaya, and then she went searching. Full stop, end of story. That's an easy script for you to remember, Janie, and you're not going to get anyone in trouble by saying the wrong thing. But it seems as time got on, Janie didn't like what people were saying. Janie decided to start defending her son. So we have the introduction of the fort or the cabin or the camp in the woods. Note how she referred to her granddaughter with her backpack and putting the snacks in the backpack, taking it up to the camp in the woods. Further down the track, she introduces the notion of Lily's backpack was one that was not allowed to be taken outside, but she wanted to be just like Janie's granddaughter. So before they latched on to the new narrative, where that backpack is the one that is used when the kids go and stay with Cindy, what we have originally from Janie is the backpack is one that doesn't go out of the house, but Lily wanted a backpack like her granddaughter's. So I think in Janie's mind here, she's establishing this idea of the children wandering up into the woods, packing a bag with food, and going up to the little camp in the woods. But then, for some reason, she decides to back out of that one and talk about Jack not going through the woods on his own, which is kind of interesting. So on one hand, she's working hard to introduce this narrative of the children possibly going up to this location in the woods, and then she's backtracking really quickly and going, oh, but Jack wouldn't go up through there. Oh, but I thought the first place I thought of was the woods. So in her head, she's decided to run with a little ad-lib. She's forgotten the script or she's lost the script that Daniel and Malaya gave her, and she wants a bigger role. So now she's starting to introduce all this new information.
So Jack and Lily would not have walked in the woods. The only distance they would have walked is up to their little fort that they built. Lily is scared of bugs and spiders, the opposite of Jack. When I see them out here in the yard and there's a fly or a bug or something, if Jack gives her one of her bugs, she goes, I don't want that, or worms. She won't touch worms. She won't touch bugs at all. She gets scared of them. She runs in the house when there's a fly or something around her.
Janie, next time you have to cover up for whatever it is that your son does, can I recommend that you actually write your script down somewhere and you put it somewhere safe and keep it somewhere safe so that any time you have to retell it, you can check the script first. Because she's really confused here. Again, she's talking about them going up to the fort, but then she introduces the concept of Lily being so scared of bugs and worms and stuff, and if she sees a fly or a bug, she screams and runs into the house. And she goes on to say that, because of that, there's no way they would have gone up there into that fort in the woods. Honestly, with Janie, it's like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. She gives you an idea, but then she says, well, that wouldn't be possible. But she's insisting that the first place she thought of looking was in the woods. She's saying they play in the woods, and then she's saying they'd never go up into the woods on their own unless they're with my grandchildren because Lily's scared of bugs and Jack won't walk through the woods. This woman doesn't know what she's doing.
After that, as I said, I came in, got my boots on, and I went up the hill, and I met Daniel, as I said, up the top of the old road just above my RV. So if you look at the map, or the aerial view of my place, I don't know if it shows you or not, but if you look at an aerial map of it, you will see an old road just up the top of the hill here. So when I get up at the top of the hill, I seen Daniel, and I asked him if he found the kids yet. He was in the vehicle, in Malaya's vehicle, and he said no. And he asked me if I was going with him. I said no. I said I'm going to search this area here.
The other thing that Janie does when she's telling you something, the thing that she's focusing on is the main thing that she is focusing on. Meaning she forgets other details that she's given previously. So in this instance, her focus is that she met Daniel at the top of the hill. And this is when we get are you coming with me? And she's like, no, I'm going to search all around here. So that's her focus. So she forgot the part about wanting to check where the kids would play at the fort. Instead, she's gone straight up the hill and ran into Daniel at the top of the hill. No thought at all for this fort. This is so typical Janie of wanting to push something, in this instance, wanting to push her running into Daniel up at the top of the hill, and not realising that she's contradicting her previous statements or leaving out information that she gave in previous statements. Now this, I believe, was July, and still there's no mention of Daniel running up to the cabins in the wood, which were only 30 seconds away, and running back. The only time we heard anything about the distance up to that location is in that news article, which I'm guessing is where he got the idea from.
Then we noticed the boots were gone. We went outside, made our way into the backyard. We didn't see them anywhere. And Malaya said, should I call 911? And I said, well, just wait 1 second. I ran up in the woods to the kids. They have cabins up in the woods. It's about, 100 feet up in the woods. Ran up there, ran right back down, which only took me like 30 seconds. And I was screaming for Lily and Jack, all the way up when I was running up to the cabins. And my mother heard me, so she came out and said, what's going on?
So do you think that Malaya was probably the original scriptwriter? When you look at the way she wrote her statement, she does come across as someone who does do a little bit of creative narrative writing. Because ever since Malaya cleared out, Daniel and Janie have just been coming up with new stories or changing their stories. And here we get in the CBC podcast the introduction of Daniel running up to the cabin in the wood, running back down again, and quoting the news outlet, it only took about 30 seconds. And he's referring it to cabin in the wood. So why has this all suddenly been introduced? It seems to me that this has been introduced because pressure has been put on them and they really want to now push the abduction narrative. This has all been introduced after Durwood came on the scene, pushing the story of Malaya getting someone to take the kids and hide them. So now Daniel and Janie all of a sudden have introduced the cabins in the woods as a possible location that the kids would wander to. They would not go anywhere else. So, of course, Janie thought of that because that's where the children play. But then she has to insist that they wouldn't go up in the woods because Jack wouldn't walk through the woods and Lily doesn't like bugs. And she forgot that that's going to actually crap all over the going into the cabin area in the woods. I think what she was trying to establish there is that they wouldn't go any further than that. But she forgot the purpose of saying they wouldn't go through the woods, and therefore completely negated her argument of the only place they would go is the cabin in the woods. Daniel has latched on to Janie's narrative after Durwood came on the scene because it supports Durwood's story. If the children couldn't possibly have gone into the woods because the only place they would go is to this cabin in the woods, then surely that proves that Malaya must have given them to somebody. They're trying very hard here to deflect from the fact that something went wrong on the property. This is all aimed at deflecting back onto Malaya. But see, Daniel has the same problem as Janie. He doesn't write his script out, he just makes it up on the spot. So that when he's telling it again, unless he's telling it on the same day, he screws up.
We got through the fence, and then we're standing right in front of Mom's RV, and she asked me, should I call 911? Right? That's, kind of instinctual. You want to do that, right?
Right.
Because we don't hear them out in the yard. We never seen them in the house. We don't see them in the backyard. I didn't know if Mom was even home or not, right? Because I thought she might have went with my Uncle Ron.
Mm-hmm.
So she's on the phone with 911. I run up into the woods where the cabins are and look in the cabins, look around the area. Didn't see them. I'm screaming and yelling, Lily and Jack, Lily and Jack.
If you followed my channel for any length of time, you will know that one of Daniel's biggest tells when he is lying is his lizard lips. When he says something and then he sticks the tongue out and licks around his lips. And he says that after saying that they are standing in front of Janie's RV and after saying he didn't know if Janie was home because she might have gone into town with his Uncle Ron. But like I said, he needs to write down the script when he changes it. Because first he said, the first time we heard it, he said, Malaya said, should I call 911? And he said, no, wait, let me run up and check in the woods. And this time, he's like, Malaya said, should I call 911? And he's acting like, well, duh, of course you should. And then he's like, and then while she's calling 911, I run up into the woods and I check. So he's got his narrative forgotten already. Now, there's something here that I spotted, which, after my video from the other day, stands out to me. He said here, we got through the fence and were standing in front of Mum's RV. The video I did the other day, or the series I did the other day where it was 3 videos in a row, I pointed out that with all of Janie's audio, every time she referred to the possibility of the children getting out of the yard, there was only one time out of many when she referred to them going through the gate. The rest of the time she referred to them getting out of the fence. So suddenly it's occurred to me that Daniel has used the same language here. And I think it could be leakage. I said in my previous video that I felt that Lily and Jack may have actually gone through the gap in the fence as opposed to going out through the gate by Janie's RV. And that's why Janie's dog didn't respond, because they weren't close to the RV. The dog didn't see them. The dog probably heard them but just thought they were down by the house. And now we have Daniel leaking the same thing. Him and Malaya went through the fence. And it stood out to me because it just sounded so out of place in terms of we went through the fence to out in front of Janie's RV. Again, everything seems to zone in on that location in the driveway in front of Janie's RV. So the big question here is, why did they, a few months in, decide to introduce the narrative of the children like to play up in the woods, even though it wasn't technically introduced then, because there was clearly that interview in May where somebody, possibly Daniel, possibly Janie, took them up to that location and showed them the little lean-to and fort, as the reporter referred to them. But why all of a sudden did Janie introduce this in her interview with CBC, and why did it suddenly become a huge part of the narrative? There was no suggestion from anyone at first that the first place that they would consider looking would be in that location where the little fort was, or the lean-to. It's only after Janie came out that it suddenly became a big thing. But you have the leakage where Janie refers to it as a cabin, a fort, or a camp, whereas Daniel consistently refers to it as a cabin. So that, and I said this in previous videos, that led me to question if that's actually a bit of leakage there. And while they are trying to deflect by suggesting that, well, the only place the children would go would be into the woods here, and they're not there, so they must have been abducted, I think the wordage could possibly be leakage. I mean, I look at this thing on the left-hand side, and that just looks more like a pen. Or, yes, you could maybe refer to it as a fort. I don't know where the entrance is to it, but there must be some sort of entrance, unless it is a pen for containing something or someone. This, well, you wouldn't refer to it as a cabin. You might refer to it as a lean-to, as a cubby house, maybe a hidey hole. But as a cabin, it just seems like a really unlikely description. And can we acknowledge here that the kids did not build that, and even a 9-year-old would not be capable of building that. It was built by an adult. Now, one thing that I questioned in my previous video was that, was it possible that there was leakage from Daniel with regards to this cabin that is next door to their property, because it's only a couple of 100 metres when you measure it. Short distance up the hill to that old road, and there's a definite track that goes through to this cabin. So obviously, without knowing the exact track, I can't give you exact amounts, but I did rough measurements of the distance, first of all from Janie's RV to the track, so the big road on the back of up behind her residence, and I came up with a distance of 114 metres. It's probably a bit further than what I measured last time, but roughly that distance. That's not far. And then once you actually reach that road up the back, then by the time you go down a little bit to what appears to be the beginning of the track leading through to the cabin, you're only looking at about another 150 metres or so. So all up, it's a really, really short distance from the RV through to that cabin. Now, we have witness accounts where it sounds like Daniel was definitely heading back and forth between the house and Lansdowne Road, and possibly also heading out towards Legg Road. But of course, for those witnesses to be able to be really precise in terms of the locations where they could hear that bike or car, whatever it was that they heard, it would be difficult, because you are basing it on prior knowledge, meaning that you are going to assume that that vehicle is travelling along the road, the 289 or whatever it is. You're not going to stop and think, well, maybe it's going along the paths up the back. Could it be that something was hidden in this cabin prior to the RCMP arriving? Is that why Janie and Daniel zoned in on this area at first? You have Janie hightailing it up the hill to that road and meeting Daniel on that road. Apparently, that's the first place that Daniel went, if you go by Janie's account. Although now we have accounts of him saying that he went searching along Lansdowne Road and turned at the train lines and came back or something, which sounds remarkably like Justin Smith's account of what he heard that night. But was there something also in connection with this cabin? Now, people have questioned the fact that on the Saturday, when Belinda went searching, there was a brand new padlock on this cabin. But when you listen to the dispatch from Friday, there wasn't a padlock on the cabin. So this bit of audio comes from the time frame between 12:23 and 12:53 on Broadcastify. So just have a quick listen.
We're just clearing a cabin, one house to the right of the property when you're looking at it. I'm not sure the actual direction. Members are just clearing it now. Door was open, closed but unlocked. Just clearing it.
So you have around lunchtime on the Friday, the door was closed, but it was unlocked, and searchers went in and checked it out. So why was there a brand new padlock on it the following day? Who decided they needed to do that? I'm not sure that this has any connection to the case, but it certainly raises questions, especially when you get this continued leakage from Janie and Daniel, where they're referring to these pile of sticks as cabins in the wood. It just seems like an odd way of describing a cubby house or a lean-to. A cabin, to me, has the suggestion that it is something that is a solid structure, not just a pile of sticks. Now, we could presume that there is someone who acts in a caretaker role for this cabin and the old school, and that maybe because there were so many searches on the ground and because there were so many people in the area that were unknowns, that they decided to go in on the Saturday and put a padlock on. Maybe they ran it by the RCMP and the RCMP said, yeah, we've cleared that cabin, so yes, if you want to put a new lock on it, feel free to do so. To me, that probably seems like the most logical answer in terms of why it was unlocked on Friday and why there was a new padlock on it on the Saturday. Because I would imagine that if there was a caretaker for this property, that they may have been concerned over the influx of strangers into the area and wanted to make sure that the cabin wasn't damaged. So if we decide to discount this cabin, can we still go with the idea that maybe they were referring to this fort up in the woods and the lean-to up in the woods? One of the things that bothers me, even though Janie is physically showing the place, she claims that you can see the children when they're playing up in that little cabin in the woods. And I can't see how that is possible. There is one more possibility that I've not heard anyone question, I've not heard anyone discuss. In fact, Janie and Daniel have said about as much about this as they have about Justin, who was allegedly staying in the RV because he was having marital problems. Nobody has discussed this little cabin up on the hill next to Janie's RV. Because you could actually describe that as a cabin in the woods. I mean, honestly, if you had put me on that property and said, okay, you're allowed to go and explore the property on your own, no one's going to give you a guided tour, and we want you to find the cabin in the woods, I wouldn't even look at that little lean-to and fort thing up in the woods. I might go up there and look and think, yeah, right, well, not that. My first thought would be the cabin in the woods. You go up the bank, and it is set into the woods. But like Justin Martell, it is something that nobody has mentioned. And in fact, it is something that we're supposed to not even notice, apparently. Because not once has there been any discussion of this as a possible area that the children might play. Not once has there been any reference to what looks like something that has been built as a little cubby house, a little cabin for little kids to play in. It's not built for grown-ups. That is something that's built for children to play in. It looks like it's relatively well maintained. The little ladder going up to the door seems like it's in good nick. The door's not hanging off its hinges. You don't see any cobwebs or anything around the window or anything like that. It looks like it is something that gets used regularly. So why has there been no discussion over this? Why is it that when Janie did her tour of the property, it was so very carefully ignored? Why is it that there has been no reference whatsoever from Janie or Daniel of this little cabin in the woods? And you know what? If he was going to run from the house up to the little cabin in the woods and back, Well, yes, it probably would take less than 30 seconds. Because it's only a very short distance from that back deck through the fence and up to the cabin in the woods and then back. Janie assures us that Lily and Jack wouldn't go wandering off into the woods. Lily's afraid of bugs. Jack doesn't like walking in the woods. But then she turns around and says, well, they go into the cabin in the woods. Or the fort in the woods. Or the camp in the woods. What if her and Daniel aren't referring to that makeshift area up in the woods where apparently Lily and Jack wouldn't go without the other grandchildren? What if they're referring to this? Because this is more what I would consider to be a cabin in the woods. I don't know if it has any significance whatsoever, but I just find it curious that it is one of those things that has been very carefully avoided. Nobody has acknowledged the existence of this little cabin in the woods. And like I said, it doesn't look run down. It doesn't look like it something that maybe once used to be played in and is now falling apart. Looks like a pretty solid structure that still gets used. So why isn't it talked about? Why is there no reference to it? Why did Janie act like it didn't even exist when she was doing her little walkthrough for CBC? So it seems to me that in this video I've only raised more questions as opposed to answering questions. Why is it that they suddenly introduced this narrative of the children playing in this cabin or fort in the woods? Why wasn't it in the original narrative? Why did they suddenly decide to introduce it? Is it because Janie screwed up in her CBC interview? She was so busy showing them places that she got a little bit carried away? Or is it because at that point in time Durwood had come out and started spreading his story about the children being taken somewhere, and so now they needed to push the whole narrative of the children couldn't possibly have wandered off into the woods. You need to believe Durwood's story now that Malaya got someone to pick the children up. Which to me seems like the likely reason for them to suddenly be pushing this narrative. But where did it come from in the first place? Sure, we have someone, Daniel or Janie, showing CBC News this little area up in the woods and saying, oh, this is where the children used to play. And I strongly suspect that based on the timing, it was actually an attempt to start working on creating that possible abduction narrative. Because at the time when that interview was done, that's when the RCMP was starting to put major pressure on Daniel and his family. It was the day before they scaled back the search, meaning they were already looking in a different direction. So maybe that was the first attempt to add to the narrative to try and deflect from guilt. And why the constant linkage in referring to those little forts or lean-tos as cabins in the wood? Because it just seems like the wrong description for them. Is there more to this story? Does the cabin over by the schoolhouse have anything to do with the case? Does the little cabin in the woods next to Janie's RV have anything to do with this case? I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. Now, I will just say, I know I am not so good at answering people's comments lately. I do try, but there's so many comments and I just seem to be forever chasing my tail to keep up. members, I will make a concerted effort to try and at the very least answer all your comments. But I'm doing my best. I do read comments. It's just that in terms of the time required to respond to everyone's comments, that is quite a lot of time. So I apologise, but I do read your comments. So anyway, on that note, if you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit that like button. That helps me get my videos out into the algorithm. And please leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on these cabins, forts, camps. What do you think is the real story here? Thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.